Our presentation today in our safety moment is on hand tool safety. And I'll be giving that presentation. We have a few goals that we want to talk about for hand tools. A lot of times hand tools are kind of just an afterthought. We just use these things so much that we may not understand what the real risks are with those. Well, as Doug and Brent and myself watch claims come in, workers' compensation claims, we see that hand tools are not just afterthought. They're serious business, and we have a significant number of injuries, and some of those really serious come through those claims each and every year due to hand tools. So today we want to talk about the risks of those hand tools, safety basics for that. Most of these safety rules are fairly basic. Some of them have some details that you may not have thought of before, but we want to remind you about the risks that are out there with these tools and what you can do to protect yourself. You want to really focus on inspecting your tools. That's one of the most important ways that you can keep your tools safe, and then take action. So I would hope that every one of you today, after you get done with this presentation, will go out to the tool crib and take a look. And if you find any problems, fix them. If you can't fix them, get rid of those tools. Let's avoid those injuries from tools that are broken or just aren't functioning properly. All right, let's dive right in. So once again, these tools are all around us. We don't even think about using a screwdriver or a hammer or a chisel or a cordless drill. They're pretty standard and commonplace in our day-to-day work. But like I said, they can produce a lot of injuries if we don't use them properly and if they're not in good condition. So we want to learn how to be safe in using these hand tools. So to start with, we always talk about safety. Safety first every time. And some of these important preliminary safety rules are knowing how to use the tool, taking the time to learn the proper techniques to use the tool. Now, some things are fairly simple, like a screwdriver, but other things might have some real detail in there about how we mount the bits or blades or whatever it may be in that tool, specifics about how to safely operate the piece of equipment. And of course, one of the most important things that we can do when we're working with any tool is to use the proper personal protective equipment. Now, that personal protective equipment is specific to the type of tool and the task that we're doing, but just remember, whatever the tool is that we're using, we should always have a pair of safety glasses on. That's the most important piece of personal protective equipment that we use, and it's just something that is so important to protect our vision and our eyesight that we should always have those safety glasses with us whenever we go, because we never know when we might end up having to use a tool or putting ourselves in a situation that put our eyes at risk. Some things that people don't think about from time to time when they're using tools is tying up loose clothing, tying up long hair that may be dangling around, removing jewelry that could get tangled up into a rotating piece of equipment, a drill or something like that. And you laugh about that. Well, go on YouTube and do a couple of searches about people getting their hair wrapped up in equipment or machinery or even a cordless drill, and you'll probably change your mind. It only took me once to see somebody get their ring caught on a piece of equipment and degloves, what the type of injury they call, and it basically pulled all the flesh off this poor guy's finger. And it only took me to see that one injury for me to go home and say, honey, I'm not wearing my wedding ring anymore. I still love you and all, but I'm not getting my finger ripped off. So think about that. What type of jewelry, what type of clothing, hairstyles, all of those things when I'm operating these tools, because it can be a risk. So once again, remember to use that personal protective equipment. If you're operating a chainsaw, that's going to take a whole different set of personal protective equipment than it would to use a screwdriver or a hammer. And so get the right stuff for the job. If you don't know what the right stuff is, ask your supervisor. Each employer should have gone through and done a review of each task and have required PPE for that. That's one of those OSHA requirements is to have a PPE selection and determine what's the right stuff. Once again, remember, always have those safety glasses. So one of the really essential rules for hand tool safety is to use the right tool for the job. And to start out with that, my recommendation is to buy good quality tools. Over the years, I bought a couple of cheap tools because I'm only going to need this one time, and man, it's a lot cheaper if I buy this lesser quality tool. And pretty much every time I've been disappointed. The potential, though, is that you could be injured by a tool that doesn't meet the requirements that this task has that we're doing. So take the time to go and find quality tools and buy quality tools. Get the tool for the job that you're doing. Don't try to cut corners and use a tool that's not designed for that task. And along with that, make sure that we're storing our tools in a location where they can easily be found. And, hopefully we put them in a place where there's, a shadow board or something like that where the tool goes every time. We store it in a safe location and a place where people can find it so they're not searching around and maybe be tempted to use the wrong tool just to get the job done because they can't find the right tool. And as we use these tools, we want to use them in the right way. A wrench or a ratchet is designed to handle a certain amount of force. And if we put more force on there than it's designed for, it could fail on us and could hurt us. So as I take that ratchet out and I can't quite get enough leverage to break that nut or bolt loose, we might be tempted to use a cheater bar. Don't use cheater bars. That puts excess force on that tool, and it could break the tool and injure you in the process. Know what the limits are of your tool. Each tool has its own design and its own capabilities, and if we go beyond that, that puts us at risk of injury. If it slips or if it breaks. And along that, if a tool is damaged, throw it away or fix it. If it's something that can be fixed, that's fine to fix it, but take it out of service and fix it. If it's not something that we can repair, throw it away and make sure it gets thrown away. And so somebody doesn't take it and stick it back in their toolbox because they think they found this great tool that might turn out to hurt them in the long run. Fix it, throw it away. One more in the line of using the right tool for the job. Don't use a screwdriver as a chisel, and don't use a chisel as a screwdriver. They are different tools, and they are designed to do different things. And if I use the wrong tool for this job, it can end up causing me severe injury. Another in these rules is your hand isn't a hammer. Don't use it like that, and neither is your crescent wrench. Don't hit your crescent wrench. Don't use your crescent wrench as a hammer. There are specific tools to do certain jobs, and that's how we should use those tools. Every time we use a tool, we should inspect it. We should pull it out and take a look at each side and see what's going on. Number one, and one of the most important rules is to keep the guards in place. If there's a guard on a hand grinder, an angle grinder, it's there for a purpose. The reason that's there is if that wheel ever flies apart, it's to keep it from cutting your jugular vein. It's to keep from slicing you open. And so that guard should be in place. So make sure that they're in place. Make sure there's no damage. Look at the real action parts of your tools. Where could they be damaged most often? Spend the most time inspecting those cords, the hardware, and really, if I'm looking at a piece of power equipment, an angle grinder or die grinder or something like that, look at those look at those consumable parts, the cutting wheels and things like that that can have more damage than maybe other parts. Look for loose or missing parts and tighten those up. Replace those parts. If I can't find the guard, I can't find the piece, take that tool out of service and report it to your supervisor. Maintenance of tools is an important part of preventing injury as well. The old adage says a sharp tool is a safe tool. Now that may seem a little counterintuitive because, well, a sharp tool that could cut me easier. Well, the reality is, a tool that is dull or a tool that is inconsistently sharp and dull is a really dangerous tool. They can slip, they can not perform as they're supposed to, and cause us real serious injury. So keep your tools sharp, keep them in good condition. There are some things that we need to do on periodic maintenance. It might be lubrication, cleaning, and repairs that we have to do that stuff. Periodically go out and take a look in the tool crib and inspect the tools that we have. And if there's any problems, fix it or chuck it. When we look at accessories or the bits, the blades, the cutting wheels, and those types of things we might be using on our tools, we need to use the correct accessories. So just in this picture here, we've got a cutting disc that is far too large for the grinder that we see here. That could result not only in serious injury, but this could be a fatal injury if the RPM is not right and that wheel flies apart and slices somebody open that's in the area. The guard is missing on this grinder as well because they had to take it off to put the wrong size wheel on there. So make sure it's the right stuff for the job and for the tool that we're using. Don't exceed the capabilities of a tool. All right. Proper tool handling. Some of this stuff may seem a little bit, oh, well, that makes sense. But I'll tell you, I can't tell you how many times I see people carrying tools in their pockets. They've got a screwdriver, they've got whatever that tool may be in their pockets. Well, you sit down on that tool and it just might poke you. It might cut you. We have tool belts for a reason, and that's where we carry many of these hand tools. Would be in a tool belt. Don't stick them in your pockets because that's an unsafe way to walk around. Clean hands prevent injuries. What am I talking about there? Well, if you've got greasy hands and you're putting a lot of force on a tool, there's a chance that it can slip off. There's a chance that you could have that tool hit you in the face because of your slippery hands. Don't carry a tool around by its cord or a hose if it's an air actuated tool. That can damage the cord and potentially expose you to electrical hazards. If you're carrying a tool around, carry it the sharp end down, the heavy end down. Don't walk around with your finger on the trigger, just the same as if you're at the firing range with a firearm. Don't have your finger on the trigger until you're ready to operate that piece of equipment. And then we look at you. How do you interact with your tool? I've got a job to do, and I've got to put some force on this drill to drill a hole in a certain location. Well, I want to have good footing and manage my balance. We've seen many times that people are using a simple hand tool and they get off balance and fall off a ladder, or they slip and fall on the floor and injure themselves. When you're done with the tool, clean it and put it away, where it's supposed to go. Pretty simple shop safety rules, but many times we don't see those happening on a consistent basis. So walk out in your shop today and say, how are we doing? Are we really hitting all of these important safety rules? So another part of that is to look at our work site and make sure that we have a safe work site before we start using that tool. If I'm going out to use a nail gun, I want to let people know that I'm using that nail gun so they don't get in a spot where they shouldn't be. If somebody gets in harm's way, I need to stop using the tool and ask them to get out of the way of, the grinder or the nail gun or whatever it is that I'm using that could impact them. We need to look at our housekeeping. Slips, trips, and falls are worse if you've got a tool in your hand. That's just, if I'm running that big grinder that we saw a couple of slides ago and I slip, it's going to be a big problem because that grinder has a lot of torque and I may not be able to control it as I'm falling or slipping, and that could cause serious injuries. So watch for slip hazards, watch for trip hazards, those cords and hoses, things like that can trip us, slippery spots on the floor. Clean those up before we start using the tool. And whenever we're using gas-fired equipment, we need to look for fire prevention. Get rid of the combustibles in the area. Make sure you've got a fire extinguisher available. And for electrical operated equipment, look for where your tools are going or your cords are going. Don't put those in wet areas. Don't put them where they can be damaged by sharp objects or oil or solvents or anything like that. Here's some basics just on some really basic tools: hammers, files, chisels, screwdrivers, that type of tool. Simple things on that. Make sure they're in good condition. Files need a handle. So we look at this file here, you buy a new file and it has a really sharp end on it. And if you've ever tried to use one of those, you know that you can stab that right into your hand or other parts of your body as you're using the file. There should be a handle on that. So put that handle on to give us a good gripping surface and protect us from that sharp end. Just all we're talking about files. Files are not used for prying or hammering on things because they're made of hardened steel and they can shatter and cause nasty lacerations or get in your eye, that kind of thing. Make sure you're using the proper bits, blades, those types of things on our equipment. Maintain mushroomed heads. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're using a chisel, after I use the chisel for the while, the head will start to bend over and it kind of looks like a mushroom. Well, that could be dangerous because those pieces can break off and hit us in the eye. So as our chisels start to mushroom a little bit, we should work on that. Grind those edges off and make that safer. And one of the most common safety rules that we hear about is cut away from yourself. If I'm using a sharp object, don't cut towards myself or towards other people. Make sure if I slip, I'm just cutting air and I'm not cutting myself. Air tools are really common. Air nozzles, using these air nozzles to clean things, to blow dust out of a radiator, to clear off a piece of work that we're doing a process on. That is an operation that can be hazardous to us. If that nozzle, like we've got in the picture here, develops more than 30 psi, it can actually inject air through our skin into our bloodstream, and it could be lethal. So OSHA has a standard that says those nozzles can't develop more than 30 psi if they're deadheaded. And then I say, don't deadhead. What does that mean? Well, that means I take that nozzle and I put it directly against my skin. That's called deadheading, where it could actually inject into my bloodstream. Well, if you took that same nozzle and put it up against a wall, what would be the total pressure? Well, if you look at this nozzle that's on the slide, it has two holes on the side of the nozzle as it goes out. And what they do is they allow blow by. You can have a higher pressure. I could have 100, 120 psi pressure coming into that hose. But if it were deadheaded, these blow-bys, the holes on the side, would prevent that nozzle from developing over 30 psi. And you can look, and most of these nozzles will say that they are OSHA compliant. Don't blow yourself off with air. If you got dust on you or somebody's around you, don't use that compressed air to blow on those people or blow stuff off of you. You can get objects in your eye. And once again, there's potential for injecting that air into your bloodstream. Um, if I've got rotating equipment, so I have an air drill or some other piece of equipment like that, air equipment rotates at a high rate of speed. Those little die grinders, some of them are over 10,000 RPM. What's the problem with that? Well, if I use a cutoff wheel or a grinding wheel, whatever it is, that is not designed for that type of an RPM, that wheel might just blow apart and cause injury to me or somebody that's standing around me. So make sure it's designed for the RPM of the equipment that we're dealing with. Once again, protect your hoses from heat, oil, sharp objects, all of that, so we don't have unexpected release of air pressure. Electrical tools carry a lot of extra hazards with them because they're carrying electricity, and we can get shocked, burned, cause fires from that electricity. So every time I use an electric tool, I want to inspect the cord. I shouldn't carry the tool by that cord. When I inspect the cord, I'm going to be looking for some important things. Proper grounding is one of those. So if the plug on that tool has the third prong, if it's designed for that, it needs to be in place. So if it's broken or missing, you need to take that tool out of service. Don't use an adapter if you don't have an outlet that has a grounding prong or grounding opening on that outlet. So what do I do if I can't use that? Well, we can add the correct outlet and get it grounded, because a tool that isn't properly grounded could electrocute you, could shock you. So when we talk about these tools, we might have tools that don't have a third prong. Well, they need to be listed as double insulated. That means that the outer case, just think of a drill, that outer case is insulated from any of the electrical systems. So if something goes wrong in the drill, it's not going to electrify the case. I remember an old drill that my father had. It was a big metal drill, really torquey, low RPM, but that thing could drill through anything. But I found out one day that it was not double insulated. I was working in an area where the ground was wet, and it reduced the resistance, and I turned that drill on and it lit me up, and from that point on we got rid of that drill and used other tools that were double insulated. When we're looking at electric tools, we want to protect those cords from heat, oil, sharp objects, et cetera, et cetera. If I'm working outdoors in wet areas or using extension cords, I should have a ground fault circuit interrupter, either on the outlet that I plug into, or they have portable GFCIs that you can take out on a job site. What does that do? It doesn't allow or it will turn off, just like in your bathroom. If the hair dryer gets dropped in the sink, it will pop the GFCI in the outlet in your bathroom, and that's what we do on a job site, construction site. We'll have a GFCI. So if the current that's returning after it goes through the tool is less than 3 milliamps, is reduced by more than 3 milliamps, it will pop that GFCI and protect you from being electrocuted. The breakers protect tools. They protect the conductors, the wires. They don't protect you. They might protect you from a burning building or burning up your tools. They don't protect you from electrocution. A GFCI protects you from electrocution. When you pull a cord out of the outlet, don't just yank it from 20 feet away. Go up and grab a hold of the handle that's designed to pull that out. If I just yank it from a distance, that's going to damage that cord over time. And once again, keep all of this electrical equipment away from water. Another reminder on electric tools is and this could be pneumatic as well, but when I'm changing tools, I'm putting a new drill bit in, I'm putting a new cutting wheel on a grinder, whatever it may be, unplug that tool when I'm changing out the bit or wheel or whatever it is, because we don't know if we're going to hit the button or somebody else will do something. Control the power in that tool and prevent unexpected actuation. Battery operated tools can be dangerous as well, and a big part of their danger comes from the battery themselves. Batteries can overheat. Um, they can start fires. I was at a I went to take one of my kids' phones to a repair shop on Friday, and as I was in discussing with the clerk at the front of the store what needed to be done to this phone, I heard a really loud cuss word come from come from behind the wall, and the clerk looked around the wall and said, "We need to leave now." And so we evacuated the building, and so I'm standing in front of the building. A couple other employees come out coughing and gagging, and I inquired as to what had happened, and it turned out it was one of these rechargeable batteries that had caught on fire and exploded. And these folks have got a lung full of some nasty stuff out of that. Batteries can be dangerous, so when I'm charging those, I need to have it in a non-combustible environment. Don't have combustible materials around. Don't leave these things. Don't leave these things charging for extended periods of time. And watch out for heat, and no, and just on these battery operated tools, know their limits. They don't. They Most of these are not designed to perform the same as a corded electric drill or other electric tool. And we can overdo these tools and cause them to catch on fire by working them too hard. All right. Grinders. This is one of the most dangerous pieces of equipment that we regularly use out there, and it's because of that. Because many times people will pull that guard off, and if that wheel, which they become damaged. You look in this picture here. You drop that grinder, and it puts some cracks in the wheel. They may not be apparent with a cursory look, but it could blow up in your face and really cause serious damage. I thought about putting some pictures on here of grinder injuries, and I thought it was just a little bit too far over the edge. But if you're interested, if you want to make the decision forever to use the proper PPE and keep the guards in place on grinders, just do a Google search on hand grinder injuries, because they're pretty crazy, pretty horrific. Just one thing on PPE: when I'm using a hand grinder, safety glasses are not adequate in this situation. You should have safety glasses and a face shield on for this type of work. Once again, use the correct wheel or disc, the size, RPM, and made of the right material for the substrate that you're working on, for the job that you're doing. Do a little research and get the right stuff. We use a lot of gas operated tools, from chainsaws to generators to cut-off saws, you name it. It's used out in your operations on a regular basis. Even yard equipment like snow blowers and weed whackers and all of those things. One of the major risks of gas-fired tools comes from carbon monoxide, that any gas-fired piece of equipment can produce, and diesel fired as well. So don't be using these tools in a confined area. Make sure we have good ventilation to get rid of that carbon monoxide. Fuel is another risk when we're dealing with gas operated tools. So with that, we should look for ignition sources. What might cause our fuel to ignite, and really be paying attention when I'm refueling. Make sure that piece of equipment is turned off and allowed to cool down before I put fuel in it, because a hot motor, even if it's turned off, and if you pour that gasoline and it spills and goes over a hot engine, there's a potential it could ignite. Make sure that we've looked around for combustibles when I'm using gas-fired equipment, and have a fire extinguisher available. Fuel storage and distribution is another challenge. OSHA, as they've been going around visiting many of your locations over the last couple of years, have given citations for not using an approved safety can. What do I mean by a safety can? Well, under the OSHA standard, they require you to have a metal can that has an automatic closure on it. You have to hold that can open. This will automatically close up, and it also has the ability to restrict sparks or flames coming back into the can. So these are a little pain to use, but they definitely will make your operations safer. This should be used in place of those plastic gas cans that are more of a consumer level product. Okay. Other things that we may use as a tool would be jacks and other hydraulic equipment. If you're going to use a hydraulic jack or a manual jack, it needs to be rated for what you're lifting, whether it's a car, whether it's a piece of equipment. Use the appropriate jack for the job and make sure it's up to the task. Make sure you have it on a sturdy, solid, level surface, and so it won't, the load won't tip off of that. Make sure you're using the right location to lift on whatever that load is. Check those jacks for leaks or damage. Hydraulic jacks, whether they're big or small, those seals can become damaged, and if you start to see some leakage around there, or it starts to the jack just doesn't stay up, it kind of goes down slowly, take that thing out of service. That's just a recipe for disaster when you crawl under that car or piece of equipment. Jacks are not designed to be used to hold that equipment up. They're designed to lift, and once we lift, then we should use jack stands, an appropriate number of jack stands to hold and rated for the weights that we're looking at. Make sure that you have those in place to keep that load from coming down on top of you. Hydraulic leaks can be lethal. We talked about air leaks and how air can be injected into your bloodstream. Well, a pinhole hydraulic leak can easily penetrate your skin and kill you. So if you have a hydraulic leak, turn off the piece of equipment, find the leak, and replace the hose or whatever it is that's leaking. If you're looking for a hydraulic leak, don't use your hand to try to find where that is, because if you find it, it could be a really serious injury. Okay, I'm going to warn everybody. I told you I wasn't going to do the grinder incident, but I have to do a nail gun. I have to do a nail gun injury, and it's not terrible, but I'm warning you ahead. Don't look at this next slide if you don't want to see an injury from a nail gun. Nail guns and other equipment like that have a lot of danger with them, and so with those, we want to inspect them, make sure that they're in good shape, ensure that the safeties are in place. There will be a safety switch in there that will prevent that nail gun from firing unless it's placed up against a piece of substrate, 2x4, whatever it is. Make sure those are in place. Don't disable those. If it's not in place, take it out of service. Don't point these pieces of equipment at people. We don't know if they're, it's just like a gun. Don't point a loaded gun at anybody, even if it's got a safety on it, because it may not work. When I'm not using this type of equipment, disconnect it from the hose or the cord that it's hooked up to, so it can't inadvertently operate for us. And if I'm using a nail gun, know what's on the other side of that substrate. I'm nailing through some sheeting, and I think there's a 2x4 on the other side, or a 2x6, and there isn't. And those nails could shoot right through and injure somebody on the other side. Okay, just to wrap it up, now you can watch if you were if you were looking away from the nail gun injury. Just in summary, I'll wrap up. Hand tools are essential. They're awesome. They're things that make our lives better. I have quite the collection of hand tools out there, and I like them a lot. But they're also the potential to have some real hazards: injury to you, fire, damage to buildings or people or equipment. So with that, we need to handle those with respect. Know what the hazards are. Inspect your tools on a regular basis. If there's a bad one, if there's a problem with it, take it out of service. If you can't fix it, throw it away. Know your hazards and handle those appropriately. We gave you a bunch of ideas on here on good hand tool safety methods. I hope you'll take those and use those on a regular basis. that is the presentation for today. Anybody who has a question or a comment can type that into the chat box or the Q&A box, and I'd be happy to answer those at this time. While we're waiting for people to type their questions in, Doug and Brent, did I forget anything? Anything you want to add?
Jason, you did not get anything. I thought that was very thorough.
We're actually a couple of
This is one of those areas where it's really basic, and lots of times we don't think, a simple hand tool is going to hurt us, but it happens all the time. So thanks. It's a great reminder.
Absolutely. Awesome. All right. Well, I'm not seeing questions there, folks. Everybody's looking out the window like I am and saying, "Ooh, there's a lot of snow out there. It's going to be work." Be careful out there today. Remember, if you're shoveling, lift appropriately. Don't overdo. We don't need heart attacks. Make sure you've got appropriate footwear on. No slips and falls. This is one of those days where we need to be on high alert, not only just for hand tools, but for all of those things that a winter storm can bring on. Thanks so much for your support of our training programs. We appreciate you attending. Please feel free to call us or email us at any time with questions or concerns that you might have, and go out and have a safe day.